you about the events that happened here this afternoon. At about 12:40 this afternoon, members of the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office Violent Offender Warrant Unit arrived at 1640 Alcazar Way South, which is the residence directly over my right shoulder here, to execute an arrest warrant that had been issued, in fact several arrest warrants, for Xavier Williams, who's a black male, date of birth. I'll give you here in a second. He's about 25 years old. I'll run through all of the warrants that have been outstanding and then tell you what happened. There are 2 warrants that have been issued here in Pinellas County for Williams' arrest for armed robbery and kidnapping, and those warrants were issued in February of 2015. Those were as a result of the investigation conducted by the St. Petersburg Police Department. What I generally know about that case was there was a carjacking, there was a gun involved, and that Williams had carjacked an individual and kidnapped and taken to another location. For any more details on that particular case and the warrants that have been issued, I'll refer you to the St. Petersburg Police Department. The next thing that happened was in June, specifically on June 30th of 2016, members of the Violent Crime Task Force had an encounter with Williams, and he was driving a car that was suspected to be stolen. As a result of that, he ran from the task force and law enforcement officers, and as a result of that investigation, he was arrested and charged with aggravated felony. And then after that, when his lab test came back, he was charged with a whole myriad of drug offenses, including heroin possession, cocaine possession, hydromorphone, hydrocodone, the whole litany of about every drug you can imagine he had in his possession at that time. Warrants were since issued for those underlying drug charges. Then in July, we became aware through the Pinellas Park Police Department that they had probable cause to arrest Williams on a charge of domestic battery, strangulation, and criminal mischief. The Sheriff's Office Violent Offender Warrant Unit, because of Williams' violent criminal history, especially the robbery charges, the domestic strangulation, etc., began to look for him. So this has been an investigation that's been ongoing by the Violent Offender Warrant Unit for about the last month, and led us to this location down here in St. Petersburg, which is his primary residence, and he's also been staying at various hotels here in the St. Petersburg area. Through surveillance, deputies were able to determine that Williams was here at the house at, again, about 12:40 this afternoon. A perimeter was set up on the house. There was discussions with Williams' father, who was identified as Earl Alston, who's a black male, date of birth of 2/10/51, and Alston indicated that Williams was in fact inside the house. He knew that law enforcement was here. He knew that we were looking for him, and that he was hiding within the house. Deputies set up a perimeter around the house and began to call to Williams to come out. So over a loudspeaker system and with the perimeter set up, they were engaging him and trying to get him to come out. There were several detectives who were in the backyard on this perimeter, and one of them was Detective Cramer. As Detective Cramer was in the backyard, he noticed that a door leading from what was likely the kitchen area to the outside began to open. He saw Williams come out in a low crawl. So Williams was coming out on his hands and knees, low crawling out to try and stay below a small wall that was contained within the screen porch. As Detective Cramer saw that, he engaged Williams and told him to show his hands, identified himself as being a deputy sheriff. At that point, as Williams came out of the low crawl and came up, he took a 9mm handgun that he had in his waistband and raised the 9mm handgun toward Detective Cramer. Detective Cramer fired. He did not strike Williams, and at that point, Williams fell to the ground on top of the gun. What we know from that point is Williams was taken into custody. Again, he wasn't injured. Detective Cramer wasn't injured. The gun is a 9mm Glock Model 17 handgun that was stolen back in April from a residential burglary here in St. Petersburg off of the apartment complex here off 54th Avenue South. So in addition to Williams being taken into custody on this whole myriad of charges from the robbery, the kidnapping, all the drug cases, and the result of today's events, his father has also been arrested on a charge of harboring a fugitive. There's been dialogue over a period of time with the father, and we know well that the father was concealing Williams and placing him in hotels here in St. Petersburg. And this has been kind of a cat and mouse game now for the last several weeks. After Williams was taken into custody, he made a statement to one of the detectives that, and I'll quote, "You guys are lucky to be alive. I only put the gun down because I heard the shot. It's not worth my family losing me because of some cops." Well, I can tell you what I'm thankful of is that the deputies are safe, and that this guy who is a crime spree going back for well over a year, he's got a very extensive criminal history, multiple arrests for domestic strangulation, all kinds of other violent crimes, is off the street in jail where he belongs. So the investigation is ongoing, and I'm giving you the information as I know it, but importantly, all the law enforcement officers are safe, and he is in custody.
Sheriff, is this an example of a situation gone right as far as getting a suspect out and taking him into custody?
Well, it's certainly gone right because no deputies were injured, and we were able to get a bad guy, a true bad guy, a real bad guy off the street. And you can hear from what I described as far as the very extensive criminal history and violent crimes this guy's involved in, and numerous offenses involving guns, is that this guy needed to be off the street, and I'm just thankful that the deputies are safe, the law enforcement's safe, the public's safe, and that this guy is where he belongs. Now, this guy is out on bond right now on one of these cases, so, you know, it's very frustrating sometimes, but, you know, it's the way the system works. Also, and I didn't mention this, but I will, is we're in the process of obtaining a search warrant for the home. After the shot was fired and after he was taken into custody, we went into the house to make sure that it was safe, and there's a pretty extensive marijuana grow operation inside the house. So narcotics detectives are here, and we'll also be obtaining a search warrant for the home and executing that search warrant.
What was the warrant that you guys originally went to serve?
So what we were executing warrants on here today were for armed robbery, kidnapping, and a whole myriad of drug charges, including heroin, cocaine, oxycodone, all types of oxys, and a whole myriad of drug charges, as well as the Pinellas Park charges that were outstanding for domestic violence strangulation. So there's a whole litany of violent charges. And again, as I said, the gun that he had was stolen, and that was taken in a burglary that occurred across the street here on 54th Avenue South.
What new charges does he face?
Well, we're conducting the investigation now. As far as the specific charges, I'm sure one of them will be an aggravated assault charge, if not more, but we're still flushing that out, and the investigation is fluid and ongoing, so we haven't placed those charges yet, but I imagine it will at least be an aggravated assault charge, plus some other charges that come out of the investigation.
You have no doubt that law enforcement faced a suspect that could have put violence to your people?
Well, there's no question this guy could have put violence to law enforcement officers, to the deputies, and that is very clear by his actions and what he did, and also by his statements. He said is that I was going to shoot you, and the only reason why I didn't, and the only reason why I dropped this gun is because you shot first. And if you hadn't shot, I was going to shoot. And then he decided, because Detective Cramer saw him reaching for the gun, reaching in, and he was pulling it out of his waistband and ready to come like this. And as he was in that motion is when Detective Cramer fired. And thank God he did, because otherwise we could be in a disastrous situation here, and we could have a seriously injured or dead law enforcement officer, because this guy was hell-bent that he didn't want to go back to jail. Look at the criminal history here. Look at the history of violence, the history of violent crimes. So this guy is, in the truest sense, a real bad guy. This is a violent criminal with an extensive criminal history that was looking to do harm and didn't want to go back to jail. And all I can say is thank goodness that Detective Cramer and the other deputies who are here are safe, and we got a bad guy off the street.
Sheriff, did Williams need any medical attention?
No, again, he fell on that gun and was immediately taken into custody, and he's not injured in any way.
If he was injured, we'd have probably a very different tone to the news conference here, given the climate around the country. I mean, what about your detective firing his weapon?
Well, all I can say is thank God he did, because as Williams acknowledged, if Detective Cramer hadn't fired, is that he was going to fire. And yet, remember what I described to you. This guy is coming out low crawling. He's just not walking out. He was looking, to probably ambush those deputies that were in the backyard on the perimeter. He knew we were here. He knew that law enforcement was here to take him into custody. He knew that we were on the perimeter and we were hailing the house. We were trying to get him out. And so what does he do? He goes into stealth mode, he low crawls, and he's coming out. And he was looking to ambush those deputies that were in the backyard. So, this absolutely could have been a different situation. And what it shows is also, and with the question about was he injured, is that here's a guy with a very, very extensive criminal history, a history of violence, a history of carjackings and robberies and using guns on people and stealing everything under the sun and peddling dope all over the place, who's a true bad guy, who had a gun and he threatened a law enforcement officer with it, and the law enforcement officers acted in a completely appropriate, professional way. Even after this guy pulled a gun on him and was going to shoot him, is they did nothing other than in a professional way take him into custody with no injuries to him or to anybody else.
How many shots did the second fire? Was it just one?
Just one.
Mr. Rojas?
The father was arrested, and he's being charged with harboring a fugitive, which is a felony charge, and he's in custody. Again, in the case against the father, it's not a result of just what was happening here today. There's been communication between detectives and the father for the last several weeks. The father denied knowledge where he is, etc. We know that the father was putting him up in various hotels. The father was hiding him. He was truly harboring him. This wasn't just a situation where he did something today with the son. He's been harboring him for a while.
Sheriff, can you repeat and spell the suspect's name and the detective?
So the suspect is Xavier, Xavier, middle initial C, his last name is Williams. And it's Detective Cramer, Cramer. His name is Norman, but he goes by Chris, Chris.
CAR.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody.
That's been